Hi everyone, welcome to Off the Podium. This is episode 77. I'm here in Seattle with a violinist, Myroslava Khomik. Welcome to Off the Podium.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here.
I realized it's been a long time that we've talked about this. We went back and forth and it never worked out. And it's actually great because now it's live and in person. Well, not technically not live, but in person.
Yes, in person. And it's nice to do this finally. Yes, I know we've talked about it for quite some time, and it's finally a good time to do it while I'm here in Seattle.
Yeah. So the first question, why the violin?
Why the violin? It's a very broad question, and I'll try not to take too much time with it because I can go in depth. But essentially, the way I started playing, I was very, very young when my parents apparently asked me this question, which instrument I would pick, and the choice I had was between the piano and the violin. And I think perhaps partially because I was introduced to the sounds of the violin from such early age, basically since I was born, because my brother used to play violin. Without hesitation, I picked violin. I don't remember this conversation. Of course, I was younger than 4 years old. So I'm told that I was very confident and picked violin right away. So I made my choice when I was 4.
Wow. And you've come a long way, played all over the world, many different places, chamber music, concertos, all these things. And people I'll definitely have a link for people to read up on you and your bio. We sort of are in a weird way from the same country.
Yes.
Because Ukraine and Armenia both used to be part of the Soviet Union.
Right.
And it's always fascinating and interesting to hear a little bit about that. What was it like growing up in Ukraine? And the second part of the question, when you got to the States, how was maybe learning the violin different from everything that you experienced in Ukraine? Was it different methods, different technique? What was something that really was shocking or a culture shock?
Definitely, there was a lot of aspects of culture shock on many different levels. But speaking more generally, growing up, yes, we come from similar background. We both know how it was to be growing up in the former Soviet Union. Definitely very different world. But I experienced different life already when we moved to the western part of Ukraine, which was very European and liberal, democratic. It was my first, I guess, slight culture shock. I was very happy when we moved to the western part. I could speak Ukrainian finally, which I wasn't able to in Crimea, where I was born. So that aspect, of course, I can also go in depth and talk a lot about growing up there in general. As far as violin studies, I'm very grateful that I had that upbringing. I studied in Lviv, which is cultural capital of Ukraine, and I was going to specialized music school there, and I had amazing teachers. I can say confidently that throughout my life, I've been very fortunate to have a lot of different violin teachers and other music teachers that have been great mentors and gave me strong background and made me want to continue in music. As far as moving to the US, again, it's a whole new chapter. Different journey, different culture shock. I had to get used to a lot of new things. It was new world. It was definitely new world, and moving here by myself also made it into a different set of challenges and made it adventurous.
Yeah. Well, actually, that brings me to the next thing. I want to know, you've had so many different experiences with so many different orchestras, chamber ensembles. Something that was might be an interesting story to tell. Somewhere you performed, something unusual happened. Share something fun with us.
Oh my goodness. I feel like if I were to take every performing experience, there would be some small sub story to each experience because, as you know,
Yeah.
it's never boring
Yeah.
in our world.
Yeah.
I'd like to say this though, because I can't pick one. There's like a lot of things that would stand out in my head. I do get inspired a lot by traveling to different countries and especially to new places and discovering culture, meeting people, and having personal experiences which guide my musical experiences significantly and give me a satisfaction on much deeper level. So it would be hard for me to just like spontaneously right now to pick one.
Can I
I
help
may
you?
have to think about it.
Can I help you? And I do like that you went and played in different countries, but the one that I like is the one with Vietnam.
Oh, that story. Yeah. It was probably one of my very, very first truly international visits as a soloist to perform in Saigon. And it was early on in terms of my experience with programming different things and suggesting different things. So I think I told you this earlier, how I proposed to play Shostakovich Violin Concerto, being a big Shostakovich fan, not only for his music but also for what he stood for,
Yeah.
with his entire style and concept behind music. Going to Vietnam, I thought that it was important for me to convey the message of how Shostakovich was
Yeah.
very much against the regime in his music. And I remember being so outspoken there, giving an interview. The concert was sponsored by Saigon Times, and so they did a lot of publicity, and I had like big billboards of my face around the city, which was so shocking to me.
Yeah.
Again, it was an amazing experience, but I remember talking to the journalist that was interviewing me, and specifically making it a point to talk about what Shostakovich stood for, you know, when he was writing his music in this oppressive regime. And when the interview finally came out and was published and I was reading it, I realized that they excluded every single part of it. And that's when I realized how, of course, in that country, it's very still conservative and very strict, and you're not supposed to be outspoken about political things whatsoever. And that was quite a revelation because, of course, coming out of a Soviet country, you think that it's in the past, but not quite.
Yeah, and we did talk about this.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of things that happen in the world now, including maybe some of the events in Ukraine and other places in the world, we think that a lot of this is, like we earlier talked about privately off air, is that we think of some of these things in our lifetime as things from the history books.
Exactly.
And we might not think it would happen ever again because it's in the past. But it's really crazy to think that in our lifetime, all these crazy, ridiculous things that are happening, and maybe the future generations will read these things again, and hopefully they'll be better at preventing some of these things. And not just, and hopefully future generations in all the different countries prevent somehow from these things happening. But would that be possible? I don't even know, because it seems like the humanity tends to go in circles, and things tend to repeat all the time.
We sure hope for changes, for positive changes to take place. And you're right. We were talking how when you're sitting, being a teenager and sitting at school and learning about all these events, you think that it's all in the past. And all of a sudden you find yourself in this world experiencing things that are pretty much repeating themselves in a way. But being an optimist, I always hope that there are a lot of things that are changing, maybe not so visibly obvious yet, but definitely a lot of change happening. Even, in our music world, I see a lot of artists being a lot more outspoken about other issues. They don't only talk about their art as art standing aside just on its own, but it being connected to a cause to bring bigger issues to discussion and to make a change. And that's something that each of us can take part in,
Yeah.
and make that happen.
On that point, advice to young musicians, whether maybe an advice to young musicians as a musician, maybe a musical advice, and also maybe an advice to young musicians as just a human in this world, or maybe to any young person. What advice would you give? Tough question, but maybe something you would have enjoyed if someone told you
Yeah.
early on.
I've been lucky, like I said, to have good mentors early on. And of course, difficult to pick one advice because it's such a spectrum of what makes you into an artist, and more importantly, into a human being, into a person. But from music point of view, to a musician, I would say, of course, hard work, consistency, and inspiration that comes not only from your field, but it's essential to always develop other sides of your talents, of expand your horizons in many ways. Education on many different levels. So if you are a visual artist, you have to educate yourself in music and in history and all that. And just as much as when you're a musician, you have to educate yourself on the level of being aware of what you're studying. How does it fit into other disciplines? You have to be constantly educating yourself and constantly be curious.
Yeah.
And look for good role models.
Yeah.
Which will point you also in the right direction.
And speaking of that, you recently met someone that you loved and cared about what type of work they do, and you had a random meeting with that. Well, not so random,
yeah.
but that was another interesting story that we talked about. And I know it feels like you're repeating yourself, but I'm sure many people listening would really enjoy that story as well.
Yeah, I think we were talking about how I got a chance to meet Barbara Hannigan, who's a fan I've been for many years now. I've been following her career, and I just admire her as an artist and on many different levels, and especially to see her now running a mentorship program, and the way she's doing it is so inspiring, not only to singers but to artists like myself.
Because she's a singer.
She is a singer herself, yes. And now she's also a conductor, so she being a woman, of course, it's even more so inspiring to see for women who want to either start conducting or being a singer and a conductor. It's a wonderful role model to have. But for me, it was more than just seeing her craft, is how she approaches anything that she does. She's all inclusive in terms of where she draws her inspiration from. And being able to meet her actually at Ojai Festival this past summer has been a very great, inspiring experience for me. I made it a point to come and see her rehearsals and performances. And I didn't know what to expect because she doesn't know me. But the minute I approached her and got into a conversation, she was very welcoming. And it was something that showed me how it's the best example that all of us should be. When somebody is seeking for inspiration or for advice, it can make or break a person that approaches you. And that's just crucial for everybody to remember. It doesn't matter if we have huge career or just, not so huge. It's important to remember that you have a big impact on people no matter what. And I was able to chat with her and ask her questions, pick her brain, and of course observe her work closely, and she continues to inspire me.
Leaving the inspiration aside, competition. You've done a couple of competitions yourself, and I'm sure a lot of us struggle with the thought of a competition. And some of these competitions, it's even tough to enter because there's just so many people that are interested to even just get to the first round. It's competition to get to the first round. maybe another form of advice to young musicians, or talk about your experience in competition, what you like, what you dislike about the idea of music competition.
That was actually the most recent conversation
That's right.
we had.
But so many
And
of these conversations
yeah.
were so great that thinking back, I almost wish I just pressed record and we didn't even have to do this
I know,
now.
right?
Because you had such great thoughts about it.
Yeah, next time just like have a secret microphone rolling.
Yeah.
No, I do have what may seem like a contradicting take on the competitions, because one side of it is I really, really am convinced that competitions do a lot for a young musician's growth. It's a great experience to have early on, especially to be exposed to and to participate in it. Every time I've done the competitions, I've grown so much in so many ways. That being said, it can be very taxing emotionally, and it cannot become something that fully defines developing musician, because competitions are also very subjective. Mm-hmm. They're a gamble in many ways, because you put so much work into it, but it doesn't mean that if you don't do perfectly in that one point in time, it cannot define how you feel and what you do and moving forward.
Yeah.
It is a good experience to grow, to build your stamina, but to meet great people, to be heard, and to be inspired in a positive way for the future. But it is definitely not the only way to grow. And so I always loved this quote by Bartok, that competitions are for horses. And I agree with it on many levels, because an artist is a hybrid between, a tough animal and a sensitive soul. So you have to maintain both sides and not give up either one. And that's the core of how to approach competitions, I think.
I love it. It's great. And I'm glad you were able to say a lot of the thoughts that you talked about, and I thought it was great. And as soon as we finished talking about the competitions, I was like, I really wish I had pressed record on this somehow on my phone. Ukraine and the Ukrainian language, we talked about how I said it has a really unique ring to it. And not just the language, the people. A couple of questions about Ukraine. One, something you would like to share with people who might not even know where Ukraine is, although it's a pretty humongous country. Yeah. One, just something about Ukraine that you want to share with people. And second, some Ukrainian artists, specifically Ukrainian artists that have inspired you, or some people that you've recently learned about that you want to share and give their name, so maybe people listening could say, okay, I'll check out that violinist from Ukraine or that composer.
Okay, great question. Yes, answer to the very first part of your question. It is Ukrainian language is a very melodious language. It is its own language. The nation is a very, how do you say it? A nation that loves to sing, right? We have a huge amount of folk songs and just folklore creations. People are very creative. In general, it goes back centuries. It's a very deep culture with very deep and complicated history. Yeah. So,
up until now, this present moment.
Yes. Well, I am glad to see that people are becoming much more aware of the country as a country and not just as a part of former system. And there's a lot to be done to actually present our culture in the right way, because it has been overlooked across the globe significantly for many reasons. Yeah. But historically, it has been under a lot of pressure. Yeah. So I think I mentioned it to you before. I do feel the burden of being in a way an ambassador of the culture that is not so well known to other nations worldwide, because we have a wealth of great thinkers and literary figures and artists, musicians, composers that have never been talked about. And some of them, even though they are very important in the context of world culture, they are not well known. So I can't even just pinpoint one that I would say, oh, if you go listen to this composer, you will understand Ukrainian music. It would be hard to do. We consider the founder of Ukrainian classical music, which is comparable to composers like Dvorak and Grieg in their own time, would be Mykola Lysenko. But that's just not, it wouldn't be enough to just name his name. There's Revutsky and so many others, and many famous contemporary composers. We have Valentin Silvestrov.
Which is probably most famous one.
Yes.
Maybe.
Probably as far as it goes to the West. And Stankovic, Skorek, and many young up-and-coming composers that have beautiful works. Philosophers also that are probably some of the most significant philosophers, such as Grigory Skovoroda, and literary figures like Shevchenko, that are basis of our culture. They're well known, of course, in Ukraine, but maybe not so much abroad, that I would love for people to be more aware of and perhaps check out some of their creation.
You said cultural ambassador, and I'm sure people would think of you that way as well, because you've done a significant project during your doctoral work to sort of present a lot of, or some of what we talked about Ukrainian music through your dissertation, and also through playing. You know, you're playing a lot, and including some Ukrainian composers, and maybe commissioning works by composers who might not even be Ukrainian, but you've inspired them, so they write something for you, and we've talked about that as well. Do you want to mention that?
Sure, yes. I'm always happy to talk about the collaborations that I get to do with some of my colleagues, and one in particular, my recent commissions with Josh Rodriguez, who is not a Ukrainian composer. He's a young Los Angeles-based composer, and it's a long story, but the gist of it is we have discussed this work for violin and string orchestra, and Josh, being very well versed in history, and he did a lot of research, and he composed this amazing concerto that reflects a lot of the events of Ukrainian, from the historic events that were happening in 2014 in Kiev. It's really, really well written work, and I'm very excited to be presenting it soon in a more accessible version, because we will be recording it. We did a soft premiere of it last year, I think, in Los Angeles. So it has been wonderful to collaborate with people like that, who can embrace the culture, be interested in it, and come up with the work that fully reflects what I would want to express through music. It's been very satisfying. Also, I've collaborated with Boris Skalsky, who is a Ukrainian diaspora composer based in New York, and he wrote a commemorative piece for me for solo violin that I had a chance to premiere in New York, and now I just played it. I had a chance to perform in Los Angeles for the Holodomor commemoration. Ukrainian Holodomor, I'm sure you know what it is. Unfortunately, still not a lot of people are quite aware of Ukrainian genocide of 1932-33, and we also tried to educate people more about it and bring it to light. So yeah, these are some of the works that I've been fortunate to have and to collaborate with these composers on. But besides that, of course, several years ago, my dissertation was built around Ukrainian composers, and the musicologists that were guiding my dissertation process were very encouraging for me to go more into depth, to shed more light on Ukrainian music history, because it's not talked about quite enough.
Yeah.
So I considered it a privilege to be able to do that and to base my dissertation on that.
A question from Art. He says, was music your first love, and did you have a second plan, something to fall back on?
Oh my goodness. So when I was a teenager, and in Ukraine, that's when you pick what you're going to be specializing in. Yes, I had quite a few dreams of doing many different things. Because I became a musician at such early age, of course at one point I had to make a choice of how to go further, because you pretty much have to make that decision when you're 15. I don't know if it's quite the same in Armenia, but
I think that was the case at some point, but I think Armenia is kind of from what I've heard, kind of taking on the US model maybe, or more Western
probably.
model at this point. Maybe the same for Ukraine as well at this point.
Yes, at this point, yes. Yeah. Probably more so. For me, it was the matter of whether you go to university or you go the musical route, which is conservatory or specialized school. That's why you have to make that decision so early. But I, at one point, was very interested in journalism and also in medicine. When I was younger, I was also attending an art school because my father was working in the art industry. So he taught me at first, and then I was more interested and went to an art school and didn't want to quit, but I had to because my violin teacher wasn't very happy with me being too busy. And I also really liked the idea of being a lawyer, but I think that was just the idealistic part of me. I still, after having graduated with my bachelor's degree, I took journalism courses for a while because it always fascinated me. I love writing in general. So I guess if I wasn't a musician, I would be either a doctor or a journalist.
We talked about this, but I want to say this on record so you could actually be a little bit more encouraged to take this on. You have to have a podcast, Mira.
Thank you. I will definitely keep that in mind and will consider doing it sooner than later, I guess. You're definitely an inspiration. I really enjoy seeing your work, and it's very inspiring to see that you are touching on subjects with people who can contribute and inspire others. This is the way to do it.
Yeah. A hobby or something that you do most people don't know about, something fun you want to share with us.
A hobby. My hobby is music. No, I'm kidding.
You're practically a professional athlete. Come on, I see you're constantly in training. Come on.
I definitely not an athlete, but I think as all young girls, I was always fascinated with dance and particularly ballet when I was younger. So I used to draw ballerinas. Yeah. Of course, in Ukraine, you can't do too many things. If you're doing music, that's all you can be doing after school. But I guess I was always dreaming of doing more. So when I was in my undergrad, I started taking dance, and I loved dancing. I learned swing, and I learned salsa, and I guess that was just a little bit of an outlet for me to get away from all the other things too serious and just have some fun. So I guess I don't do it regularly, but I do enjoy dancing once in a while if I do have a chance.
I do have a request, and this is something I have never done on a podcast, and it's great that it came to me as I was thinking about this, because I would like you to say a couple of sentences in Ukrainian to people who are Ukrainian, and they might listen to it and they'll get excited about it. Because I know for me, I get excited when there's an Armenian artist, even if they've lived abroad for many, many years.
Yeah.
They kind of talk about, and you talked a lot about Ukraine, but a couple of sentences, maybe a hello to them.
Oh, in Ukrainian,
whatever you might say.
Мені дуже приємно, що я можу бути на цьому інтерв'ю, і я сподіваюся, що є слухачі серед українців теж, і дуже рада служити тим, чим можу, і займатися своєю улюбленою справою. Дякую тим, хто слухає.
Beautiful. It does have a ring to it. It does have a melodic line
It's
to
very,
it.
yes, it's they say that Italian and Ukrainian are the two most melodious languages.
It does have it. Time flies, but this was great, and
It's
thank you so much.
amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Next one in LA, maybe.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Part 2.
Thank you so much for having me, Tigran.
Thank you.